brokenness may have meant at times that you are not well enough to continue to serve, or that you are now too broken to be on the front line. But brokenness is the tool, the avenue of connection.
Welcome to the Crucible Project podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Hi and welcome to the Crucible Project podcast. I'm Martin Brooker, one of your Crucible Project podcast hosts, and I'm excited today to have back with me Gys Seegers, a pastor and also a chaplain in the Australian Army from Perth, Western Australia, and also a key part of our community of Crucible here in Australia. Guys, great to have you back.
Thank you, Martin. It's awesome to spend some time with you again, and particularly maybe looking at a different application, so to speak, for Crucible.
Yeah.
Yep.
So for those that are listening, my background is 37 years full-time service in the Australian Navy. Guys now serving in the Australian Army. And what we thought we'd do is have a conversation about where Crucible and the weekend and the community could be quite useful for those that are veterans. And I know from my own experience that actually there was some real stuff that came up on the weekend for me as a veteran. But to kick us off, guys, you had a background as a pastor when you first went to the weekend and went into Army chaplaincy a little bit later. Love you to share the impact that Crucible's had on you, particularly as a pastor of a church and on that community of men and women.
Thanks, Martin, and thank you for your service to our country. I served in the South African Air Force as well, so veteran from that side.
Yeah.
And it's been an incredible journey as a pastor to find places of connection. I think that's probably been for me, my personal benefit that I have gained from connecting faith and meaning of life with spirituality, as well as lived experience, emotion, and being present. There's not a separate category of life that is called the spiritual life, so to speak. I think that sometimes I have categorized that, and it's once I have reached a certain level of awareness that I become spiritual in a sense. And I think that my awareness has certainly become that God, as through His Spirit, is actually present in all the traumas of life and present with every single human being. And therefore, there is a part of myself that goes, well, it does make sense that where life happens in its fullness, God's presence is there. And so I needed to know that there is connection for myself, and safe connection for myself within my own brokenness, my own humanity as a pastor.
Yeah.
And that affected my connection with my church and my elders that went with me on that very first weekend, when I took 5 of my elders with me to go and experience what it's like to have that radical kind of honesty and give each other grace and look at each other, choose to look at each other with eyes of compassion, and bring that back home. Bring that back home to our church. Would that make a difference? Would that make a difference for our members, for our families, for our children? And would that make a difference at home?
Yeah.
And I look back at that, that's the single most significant change that has blessed me, my wife, my family, my church, more than anything else that I have experienced in life.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing, I guess, is that the impact of the weekend and then also in the community is actually that it strengthened your ability to turn up and be present for not only the people in the church, but also in your role as a chaplain.
Martin, I've always been present.
Yeah.
Right. As a pastor, I've listened, and I've tried to listen with compassion. But when I listen and I then risk and share my own brokenness, that's a different kind of a listen.
Yeah,
It's not
absolutely.
a one-sided sharing listen. It is a both. And to be willing to share my brokenness as a part of a journey in compassionate listening,
Mm,
that I think creates bonding and connection more than what I've previously even thought possible.
yeah. My experience of the weekend was obviously there for my own stuff and things that I needed to deal with and face some of the challenges I had in my own life. But I found myself pretty quickly realizing that some of those challenges had been impacted on life, not only sort of in family life, but also perhaps had an impact on sometimes how I turned up as a person in service in a uniform, and also helped deal with some of those challenges that service life and operational service in across the globe. I'd love to get your perspective on your thoughts of where some of that environment that Crucible provides through the weekend and the community can actually be of benefit to veterans. Do you think?
I must say that there's already been several veterans here in Perth that have actually gone through the weekend.
Yeah.
And again, I think that the connection that they have found is a connection somehow that in the rank structure, the chain of command that exists within defense, where there's both responsibility and accountability, is not something that's new
Mm,
to defense members when they come into the weekend.
yeah.
I think what is new in some way is that there is the chain of command that is leading through vulnerability.
Yes.
And I think that maybe is something that's new. And that leading through vulnerability is another modeling of leadership to be able to lead from that place. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in defense. There are certainly leaders who model from the front what it's like to be a leader uh, through their own experience and through their own brokenness. And I would imagine that a lot of defense members are pursuing life in excellence, pursuing life in advance with power, and they want to move forward. And I guess where I see an opening is there's a concept of moral injury
Mm,
that has been gaining a lot of attention over the last 15 odd years. And alongside that is the concept of spiritual injury, where alongside and coinciding with PTSD, many members have reported that they have felt, despite the treatment and the psychological treatment that medical treatment that often goes along and with PTSD, that has helped them a lot. There was still an aspect of their moral coding
mm,
that needed resolution.
yeah.
To be willing to look at that moral brokenness, that takes a special way of approach.
Mm,
It takes a special container and it takes a special place of safety
mm,
to crack that nut open and to expect the unexpected in some ways,
mm,
and to know that there's brokenness and moral brokenness. What that repair would look like is something that a lot of veteran members are grappling with, and finding connection within moral brokenness, I think, is at times isolating,
yeah.
lonely, and really, really hard.
Mm,
And so I think that there's new for Crucible inroad into
yeah.
that moral brokenness that, from Crucible perspective, actually is not per se the event
Mm,
later in life,
yeah.
but is actually the childhood wounding that sets up a trail of events, of a trail of shadows
Mm,
that eventually, later in life, refers back to a childhood wounding that ultimately needs repair or ultimately needs compassion and grace.
yeah. There's no doubt that military services around the world and those that support veterans are absolutely focused on making sure that these things don't occur. But the nature of conflict and some of the challenging situations that our men and women who are in service in our militaries across the globe go into, that there's a potential risk for that moral injury, isn't there? And as a nature of service, and it's important that there's a safe place to go and have that. And what I'm hearing, I guess, is that the Crucible weekend and its community can be one of those places that can support that work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's because there's a container.
Mm.
There's a container in which this can happen. There's a container that makes it possible to, with confidentiality, and as chaplains, as pastors, we bring that confidentiality within the space of defense and for veterans.
Mm.
But that's not the only thing that's needed.
Mm.
There is this connection between the triggering event, which in and of itself could be extremely traumatic, and there may be PTSD consequences that results in trauma for the member that needs to be dealt with on a medical level.
Yes.
But at the same time, that event is often, I think, not an isolating event. That is also a triggering event that runs much deeper into the childhood roots,
Yes.
where the essence on this side of a veteran in their daily life may feel like their inability or their emotion, like anger or sadness, and betrayal and guilt, actually also may stem from experiences earlier on in life that get triggered by traumatic events down the track.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a special way that through the understanding of moral injury, when we have those early childhood years where our moral coding is being shaped and formed, and it's in that time of our early childhood years that we are being wounded simply because of being a human being on this planet, on this sinful planet, and the inevitability of being wounded as a child of Adam. That moral repair and post-traumatic growth, I think, if it is looked at from, with the lenses of what might the childhood injury be, I think Crucible can provide an incredible avenue to bring an extra sense of resolve, an extra sense of compassion. There's so much more compassion when I look at my child, and when you look at your younger self. There is an incredible compassion that we have for the way that we grew up, for the way that we try to make sense of life and unfairness and injustice, etc., that happen in the childhood years. And that plays out later in life. And so I think that the whole container helps that way.
And I think you made an important point there, is that if through service you have got some experience or perhaps symptoms around PTSD, it's a medical situation that needs to be dealt with first there. And
Correct.
Importantly, what you're saying here is that that moral injury is actually perhaps already exists, and in fact the service has actually exacerbated it or triggered an additional response there. And that Crucible weekends can be a safe place for working through that.
Absolutely.
No matter what your circumstances. And of course, it's not just veterans that have moral injury, by the way, either.
So true.
Yeah.
Veterans are people.
Yeah, exactly.
And when people are brokenness is a fact of life.
Yeah.
In one way or another.
Yeah.
So that's true.
Yeah. What does the role of a chaplain in the military look like?
Being present in brokenness.
Right.
And I guess the presence that we bring, the pastoral care presence that we bring for members, has a calming effect, has a caring effect. And it has an effect that somebody is not alone. They're not isolated. And it stems the tide of judgment and self-judgment and guilt and loathing that often may go alongside something that has gone wrong in life. And I guess from my perspective is that we defense also know that we have people, and it's just people that serve an army. And being a people capability, we need to make provision for the aspect of humanity that requires support and care and love and grace and compassion. And that, in essence, is something that is captured and very well captured in the role of the chaplain.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's fair to say that actually for all of those that serve in whether it be in the military or even first responders, you need a suite of support around those folk to help them deal with particular set of circumstances, which are not always easy.
Correct, Martin. And I think this is the avenue or the gateway that Crucible could provide support,
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
It's one thing for me to bring compassion and grace, and it may be seen, well, that's the padre's job.
Yeah.
Is to bring grace and kindness and facilitate forgiveness and all that.
Yeah.
But it's something different when there's a community that extends that kind of depth of truth
Yeah.
and grace and compassion and is able to hold that together.
Yeah.
And I think that's a powerful thing that cannot be duplicated or replicated anywhere else unless it's truly authentic.
Yeah.
And I think the Crucible group, the growth groups, has the potential.
Yeah.
They have the potential to exactly bring that ability to veteran members.
Yeah.
That struggle with acceptance and forgiveness.
While you were talking there, what I found myself thinking about was actually that for somebody who's still serving, the value of a Crucible weekend is that it's strengthening your relationship with God in an environment where it can feel like God is not present sometimes. The operational areas that perhaps we face as in service, can often feel like God's not present. But actually, this Crucible weekend does allow us as serving veterans and as Christians to actually strengthen our relationship with God, to move closer to that presence, to be radically honest with ourselves about our purpose and our ability to continue to serve.
Absolutely. The second component that goes along with a moral injury and repair is spiritual injury and repair. Yeah. This is not particularly per se religious or religious hurt, even though there's heaps of that too.
Yeah.
The spiritual formation of an individual happens at a young age when children are being exposed to the beyond, the over and above, that which is hard to explain, and this sense of that there's more to life, the meaning of life, making sense.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will have no problem to connect with the spiritual side of themselves, and yet between the formative years, the spiritual formative years and adult life, there often is a lot of obstacles and voices and difficulty to break through, to be able to connect to the true innocent spiritual connection or the spiritual being of my heart, my soul. And I think that what you've just described is that connection back to the divine, the connection back to spiritual channels of communication. I think Crucible puts that in a Christian context, and we have had many non-Christian men that have come and attended the weekends, that they were able to put the language of Christianity just on the side for a moment and explore the journey of spiritual renewal and spiritual rebirth and spiritual connection to a part of themselves that has gone lost.
Yeah.
And so you're absolutely right that is such a powerful connection, that there is a spiritual mover, a first mover, God who lives in that realm of spirituality, and of course in the physical world in so many ways.
Yeah.
But in that spiritual realm, and that's the bridge and the connection. So absolutely spot on, Martin.
Yeah. I'm imagining that the work that the weekend can bring for individuals, whether they're serving as not, is that it's actually about leadership, isn't it? And actually how it can strengthen leadership in a range of roles. I I'd love to hear from your observation, not only in your military role, but also as a pastor in a church, of how you've seen a Crucible weekend impact men and women with regards to their leadership capability in their everyday lives, and also in roles of service in the community.
One of the first things that comes to mind is not inappropriateness, but the uselessness of
Right.
defensiveness.
Yeah. Right.
To be defensive. And I think that's probably the first thing that I noticed that has gone out the window when true authenticity enters, is
Mm.
I don't need to defend myself.
Yes.
I don't need to react.
Yeah.
I can hold space. I can let someone else be. I can be that
Mm.
safe container because it was modeled. When I see elders, and the elders that came back from the weekend with me, they witnessed, they were there when other men dealt with their stuff, and they didn't have to fix it. They didn't have to preach at it. They didn't have to move. They didn't have to do anything. They
Mm.
just had to let it come out and not get in the way or hinder or stop it from
Yes.
coming out. And I think that I see that often in healthy, safe elders, is to let the presence of God allow hurt and disappointment and all the emotions of hate and anger and sadness,
Yeah.
let that come out. It's like a detox,
Yeah.
spiritual, emotional detox. And to be able to stand around and hold space and let God give
Yeah.
me his eyes through Jesus, and then watch how Jesus have done it to be
Mm.
spiritually present. I think that has moved me so many times, Martin.
The word that comes to me when you're talking then is freedom. Actually, is freedom to be my true self, to be on purpose. And in our weekends with Crucible, second level weekends, we talk about mission and purpose, and that certainly comes through, doesn't it? When as you become part of this community, and even second level weekends. And I'd love to sort of, without sort of obviously getting into the detail, but talk about those second level weekends. What have been the benefits of those for the men and women that you've seen walk through those weekends?
And you've touched on an aspect there of freedom and leadership, particularly on the second level weekends. That is a different kind of a freedom. It's not freedom from, but it's freedom
Mm.
in. Freedom in circumstances, freedom under pressure, freedom in challenge and in
Mm.
fear. I think there's a freedom that happens because there's moments where I can be aware of my shadows, like the leadership shadow weekend or the dark side of leadership. I'm aware now of my shadow. I'm aware that there is an agenda, if unchecked, will impact my life and drive my decision making as a leader in a particular direction. But being aware not just of the dark side or the shadow side of my leadership, but what the shadow really deeply
Mm.
wants. What is that deepest desire of myself? Comes back to, I guess, an aspect of freedom, Martin, that
Yeah.
you've said. And to be able to connect with that part of myself deepens the leadership aspect of myself to bring more freedom, not just for myself, but for those that I lead as well. So
Yeah.
that's one. And then of course there's the leadership goal that then moves over into the blessing of
Mm.
freedom. So those are two of the second level weekends that connect to the concept of finding the true honest
Yeah.
self and bringing that into
Yeah.
leadership. Yeah.
I know from my own weekend, and also being involved in staffing weekends, and hearing what you just said then is the gifts that continue to come, and we said it before, is like there is things that you don't even know that exist for you, but but the Crucible weekends, both that initial weekend and the second level weekends, all provide that opportunity to realize those gifts and beyond your expectations, beyond your imagination. But it's when you step into that, it's like you're stepping into that freedom for what was already there, always that was there for you. You know, I think that's amazing.
Oh, true, true. And I guess part of the freedom is as I can let go of things that that is not helpful. My fixer is not helpful. That part of myself that wants to fix my wife and fix my kids and fix the situation, uh, that part of myself is at times, mostly at times, not helpful. And if I can let go of that part, there is another kind of a level of freedom that then gives me headspace, heart space to in fact engage in something that is
Yeah.
helpful, which could be looking like mentoring, asking different set of questions, coming alongside somebody, listening compassionately, and I can then choose to engage in a different way to empower someone. And I think coming back, linking that back to veterans, I don't see Crucible as an end of it of itself. I think it's a tool. It's an incredible tool
Yeah.
to be able to empower men and women and veterans to be able to have a good look back into life, find a place of connection and compassion, and to be able to move
Yeah.
forward. Ultimately, I think that it's about empowering members and defense members in a spiritual, emotional, moral resiliency to move
Yeah.
forward.
And look, let's be honest. The defence and military often will invest time in character. That's an important part of service and what have you. And I can remember doing a character building weekend or week back in my early training. But I'm imagining now that actually with what we've done in the Crucible weekend, imagining that as part of that building up and preparing men and women in character for their service would be quite amazing.
Yep. And
Yeah.
bringing my own brokenness, my own
Mm.
experience without fear makes the room an
Yeah.
opening and a welcoming room. And
Yeah.
that's always the catalyst. I cannot imagine me being a clinical pastor where my life is clean and there's nothing that of my own life that is not invested, or that I can work and I'm not going to get dirty myself. The whole point, I guess, is the willingness not just to get my hands dirty, but to be able to show the dirt in my own heart, in my own life, and not to be ashamed of it, but to find that connection
Yeah.
and to move on from there. I think there's a different grace and a forgiveness that this when I reach that place with you and with others.
What would you be words of encouragement to a veteran that's listening to this and thinking about going to their initial weekend? What would you say to them?
I think that brokenness may have meant at times that you are not well enough to continue to serve, or that you are now too broken to be on the front line. But brokenness is the tool, the avenue of
Mm.
connection. And I think that veterans embracing their brokenness and learning how to do that through Crucible can actually become our best Crucible elders, to be able to hold other
Yeah.
broken people with
Yeah.
compassion and grace. And I've seen that in outside of defense with my church elders. When they embraced their own brokenness, they were
Mm.
capable to to hold young men and women in their brokenness with such an incredible compassion and safety that became a new culture. And I think that discovering that for veterans, going on a weekend and discovering through their brokenness that there are other men that can hold them despite their brokenness in with grace and respect and love. I think there's a new ministry, a new way of life that they can then extend to their families, their children, and
Yeah.
other veterans as well.
I'm when you were talking there, I'm reminded of the fact that one of the things that's so important for those that leave in full time service is to find connection in community. And so Crucible can definitely be one of those things as well, beyond perhaps those other organisations that you might sort of invest in. So, yeah. Gys, thank you so much for your time today. Really great to talk about these important subjects. Really have enjoyed this conversation and look forward to how we take this further going forward. And as we say, the journey continues. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Michael. What a blessing it is. Thank you.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Also, don't forget to check out myjourney2.com for your free 2-week trial. That's myjourneyto.com. Thank you for listening.